Hi, everyone, and welcome to My Movie Story. My name's Brian Maclear. I'm your host. We've been dropping episodes every week on a Monday night now. Thanks for watching so far and all of your positive comments and feedback. It's really great to see. So, if you're new to the show, make sure you go back and check out those first four episodes. Like the Facebook page, share it with your friends. Help me get it out there. So, my guest tonight is a good friend of mine who I've known for many, many years. Alex Stojan, and he's 40 years old. He's married with twins and he lives in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne. He's lived there all his life. And Alex and I go way back to our high school days, so we've known each other for a while. And he's a full-time self-employed car photographer and an excellent photographer, I might add. If you need photos of your car, check out his site. He does some good work. And his favorite food is barbecues and breakfast food. That's really his specialty. His favorite place to visit is New Zealand, where he takes photos of the stunning natural landscape, maybe a few hobbits if he's lucky. He calls having kids as a once in a lifetime experience, although he could obviously do it more than once, but really nothing tops it. And I completely agree with you there, mate. And when it comes to movies, Alex grew up on action and martial arts movies. He's also a real history and politics junkie, and he regards himself as a firmly right-wing libertarian and objectivist, and loves a good debate as well. So one of his films is about politics and the relationship with that, which is going to be a really good chat. So we'll get to that in a minute. And he's also a very skilled and enthusiastic outdoorsman. He loves hunting, camping, fishing, and I can really attest that, when me, Alex, and the blokes go camping, a group of mates, we would be stranded in the wilderness, starving, and probably huddled around a cigarette lighter trying to keep warm. If Alex wasn't there, we would die. So, it's very good to have him on those camping trips. So, I don't know if we take him or he takes us, but anyway, it works out really well. So, yeah, Alex, welcome to the show, mate. How you going?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, we've you and I go way back. Obviously, we've seen
Hmm.
lots of movies. When with all the boys going to the movies, talking about the movies. I remember you having a really extensive DVD collection at one point.
Mm.
You still have most of those DVDs?
I still got them all and never got
Oh,
rid of a single one. So yeah,
awesome.
lots of old 80s and 90s action movies.
Oh, brilliant. Yep.
All the good blokes, Van Damme and
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and all the
Yep.
rest. So
All the
yeah,
classics. Yeah.
absolutely,
And
definitely.
I think it's still relevant to hang on to DVDs because even though pretty much everything is streaming somewhere, some of
Mm,
the lesser known stuff may not stream for years or hasn't streamed at all, and
mm.
there's a few particular DVDs I've hung on to for that reason as well. That if it's not streaming, at least you've got it there on backup. So they're not completely
Well,
gone.
I think as well that you could have a membership with every streaming service out there. Like all of those, and even then, I might think to myself, I want to watch this particular movie, and you look at across all of them, and you can't find it.
Yeah.
And it's yes, sometimes I go
Frustrating.
through
Yeah.
all five or six of them, and I can't find a single thing I want to watch.
Yeah, and just coming back to you again briefly, mate, before we introduce your film. So you're a photographer and you specialize in photography of cars and also a bit of
Mm,
landscape stuff as well. So tell us a
mm.
bit about your business and what your sort of daily life is like as a photographer.
Sure. So I basically specialize in photography for dealerships.
Yep.
I basically my bread and butter is shooting inventory, so it's not particularly glamorous. But all the used cars and new car stock that come in, that's got to be advertised online. I
Yep.
do all the very high quality photography of that. We do video work, we do promotional videos, branding videos, road tests, all sorts of things.
Yep.
Uh, on top of that, we do like staff photos, dealership photos, basically any photography or video that a dealership might need.
Yep.
I specialize in that. So
It's a really interesting field of work as a photographer, and Alex's photos are very, very good. You can see a couple of them pop up on the screen at the moment, and we might chuck the link to your website in here as well
sure.
for people who just want to check it out and see a bit more
Hmm.
about Alex's photography skills. So far the episodes we've had a real diverse mix of films. We did have the Goonies twice in a row, but that was probably more me being like, okay, because I love the Goonies so much. But I think we'll give the Goonies a rest for a while. They might come back in episode 490 if we get that far. But I know Alex's films are going to be pretty unique because of his interests and everything. So what we might do, Alex, to kick it off is start with the film that changed you, changed your life, changed your perspective on the world in some way or another. So yeah, would you like to tell us what that film is and maybe just describe it a bit?
Sure. Film I picked is V for Vendetta by the Wachowski brothers,
Cool.
who directed the Matrix films.
My turn. I suddenly had this feeling that everything was connected. We're all part of it. Are we ready for it? The only verdict is vengeance.
So basically, it's about a masked vigilante who wears the almost like a cartoonish version of the Guy Fawkes mask, who well, I forget exactly the year it was, but several hundred years ago, tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in England, and so basically the premise being that he is this mysterious figure. You never ever see his face or any part of his body for that matter. He's always masked up and in the big black robes and everything. And he basically comes out of nowhere and blows up the Old Bailey building in London. And anyway, he's basically hunted down, and everyone's trying to sort of work out what his motives are. And then he comes out and basically says he's, you know, to put it briefly, he's basically against this fascist government that's sprung up in England, which basically came about as a result of a pandemic. And and so so straight away you could see where I'm going with this after the last few years. So basically the story then goes him basically fulfilling his plan to blow up the Houses of Parliament completely. And Natalie Portman plays the character of Evie, who they sort of stumble across each other in an alleyway when she's out after curfew, and he basically saves her from a couple of government agents. And so basically she becomes part of the plan, and eventually, slowly they figure out what he's up to, and but he manages to carry it out. So
and it was released, I think, around 2006 or something like that.
I think so. Yeah, I forget the exact year, but somewhere around there.
Yeah, so going on 15, 16 years, or nearly 20 years, I should say, 17 years ago. And like you said, written by the Wachowski brothers, who came up with The Matrix. So really, original ideas that they tend to come up with, and strikingly visual and everything like that.
Well, actually, I should just quickly mention that. So I don't think it was actually the Wachowskis that directed it. They wrote the screenplay for it.
That's right.
It was based on a graphic novel, but they actually changed it quite a lot. And the original artist who did the graphic novel basically wanted nothing to do with it because it was actually quite different.
Right. Okay.
And so so there was quite a bit of revision there.
How relevant that film is now more than ever, given what's sort of happened in the last few years. So what would be sort of the main comparisons you could draw from the film and what's been happening in the world in the past few years?
Well, so basically so you actually don't find out how the world comes to be the way it is until sort of the peak of the film, much further on. So you've got this detective and his number two, basically trying to track down this guy, work out what he's going to do. They know that so basically one day he appears on the emergency TV broadcast, and so it's on everybody's TV, and he basically gives this little spiel about what he's up to, and he says in a year from now, on November the 5th, everybody join me at the Houses of Parliament. And so he doesn't really elaborate too much more what he intends to do, but these detectives are trying to figure out what he's up to, what his plans are.
What his plan is.
And the whole time you've got this this dictator figure played by John Hurt, who does a fantastic job. And he basically he's always on this big screen, like 1984 style, and talking down to the minions. So namely this particular detective, he's head of security and so on and so forth. He's propaganda minister, and directing them work out what's going on.
Yeah.
Basically, that him and a bunch of others had owned a lot of these big pharmaceutical companies. They were invested in. A lot of the big party officials were involved in it. And there was a pandemic some years ago that killed hundreds of people at this place called St. Mary's, which I think was a school.
Yep.
And anyway, basically they used that to clamp down on everything, and because they blamed it on terrorists who supposedly confessed to doing it. Obviously, they were patsies. And these companies that they owned that created the virus also had the cure, and so they then released the cure afterwards and got extremely wealthy out of it. And
comparisons are just unbelievable. Like I was rewatching the film in preparation for this chat, and I was like, wow, like for something made in 2006 and based on a book that was written obviously earlier than that, it sort of foretold, this this scenario that was going to happen. And I was watching and just couldn't help but make those comparisons to what we've been through. And also, could you comment a little bit on how like the media in this film is portrayed and how they like manipulate what's going on? What were your thoughts on that? Like in terms, who was the real villain of the film? Do you think it was sort of the media? Was it this the John Hurt character? Was it just society in general? Like, yeah, what were your sort of thoughts on that?
Well, in this movie, you pretty much only have sort of one media. So you've got the BTN, the British TV network, which is essentially state media. Even though we don't have the state media in the same way that it's portrayed in V for Vendetta. I mean, V for Vendetta is very much, based on tropes and, stereotypical things, basically to make a point. In real life, it's a lot more complex. But gets a point across that you have this media that basically is not objective. It's not the people presenting are not thinking for themselves. They're just reading from the script. So that's definitely a big parallel between real life and the movie.
Films had a lasting impact, and I think it's a film where people who years and years from now will find it hard to believe that we lived through the peak of the pandemic. It's like, watch V for Vendetta, and it'll kind of touch on a lot of a lot of what happened. Obviously it's dramatized and fictionalized in certain parts to make it a movie because it has to be entertaining. But like it's eerie how sort of close to home it was. And I guess coming back to why you chose the film, I mean, it was the film that had an impact on you or your perspective on the world. So in what way was this film like a game changer for you? Like, what do you take away from it the most?
Well, back when it came out, and I didn't see the film immediately. It was, I think, probably a year or two after it had come out that I'd seen it. And many of my political views were sort of already formed at the time. I'm very much a anti-government sort of person, pro-freedom, libertarian type person. And the movie actually is very much left-wing, so that's complete opposite to me. But back in those days, the left were very anti-authoritarian, and well, they're the opposite again now. So they would be very much on the side of Adam Sutler, ironically. But at the time when I saw it, it wasn't so much that it opened my eyes, but the way it put it down in a way that you couldn't. Sometimes you have the thoughts, you have the image in your head, but trying to put it in a concise sort of story that you can explain it to somebody is not always easy. You've got a million ideas swirling around in your head, a million different points, and you can't articulate it. But what this movie did was it put it in a story that was compelling, easy to understand, and it shows the actual effect of those ideas and everything. And it's like, well, this is what's in my head. This is like putting it on screen. So it was sort of like it was very refreshing to see something like that at the time.
Yeah. So just sort of wrapping up the V for Vendetta chat. Is there a favorite scene or a moment or an idea in the film that you like the most, or that you kind of?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think probably overall my favorite is the scene where they're at back at St. Mary's, where, I mean, that was apparently outside of the, the quarantine zone. So there was, nobody was permitted to go there. And they meet this man, Rockwood, as he calls himself. It was actually V. And where he says to the inspector, this is basically, he tells him a story. He doesn't say this is fact or this is how it happened. He just tells him the story, and it runs through how our Sutler and his party, called Northfire, comes to power, and basically,
Great scene.
yeah, it's a fantastic scene where he basically just lays it out, and you can just see exactly how it all comes together, and it's so well spoken, and they include all the clips and everything of, like the historical clips supposedly, and it's just like one of those eureka moments. It's just so brilliant.
Yep.
And where the inspector, you can see that up until that point, he's been trying to get this guy, trying to stop him from, whatever this plan is, because he doesn't want anybody to get hurt. He's essentially an honorable man, this inspector. And the inspector says to him at the end of the story, he says, why have you waited until now? Why have you not told anybody, about this? And he says, I was waiting for you.
Yeah. And
basically saying, I'm waiting for an honorable man who I can trust.
Who's actually going to do something with this information.
Exactly. Because when you work for the government to basically go out on your own and think for yourself, it's not well liked, not much appreciated. So when he saw this person, okay, yeah, this guy's the real deal, he was the one he was to tell it to.
Yep. It came out at a time that was before the real boom of superheroes. Like you had Batman, the Dark Knight trilogy had just started. You had X-Men was around, but Marvel hadn't really taken off yet. So V for Vendetta was released at an interesting time where we were looking at these sort of more darker, brooding sort of comic book style films. Like Sin City was the year before. So much sort of similar in that vein, where it is political. It is driven by, us versus them kind of mentality. And for anyone who hasn't discovered yet and wants a bit of a foreshadowing of what we've been through in the past few years, and some very similar comparisons, and it's definitely worth a watch. And it might challenge your opinions or beliefs watching it, but at the end of the day, it's a film, and it's a safe space to sit there and be challenged and see things from a different point of view, which I think
it's certainly when you watch it, as I said, the way it lays everything out, the whole timeline in a way that, in a condensed format that you can see and understand and fully grasp. It's very powerful. And I think a lot of people, when they watch that, they think, oh, that's kind of what happened. Obviously it's not going to be exact. It's never going to be the case, but, and it wasn't trying to prophesize anything, but at the same time, it is a, universal story in that, you have a government that's used a crisis to usurp power and influence over people, and that's happened so many times throughout history. So to see that tied into something that's happened to us very recently, it makes a lot of sense.
Definitely.
And I think a lot of people,
a classic example of life imitating art, imitating life.
exactly right. So I think a lot of people who will watch it will look at it and think, yeah, okay, maybe a lot of what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe wasn't just an accident. So
yeah, it's totally okay to question things, and I think V's about getting the people of this oppressed version of London to go against the status quo, and how that all comes together at the end is really cool. So we could keep talking about this film forever, obviously, and without giving too much else away. Check out.
I've already done that. Oops.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll put a little spoiler alert warning at the start of the interview, but that's all good. But yeah, V for Vendetta. Check it out. It's pretty different. It's not your typical like superhero film, as we've discussed. And in a nutshell, you'll see the comparisons to what we've just all lived through. So, all right, good chat. All right, so for our next film, Alex, we're going to change direction now to a completely different genre, completely different film altogether. And this is one of your all-time favorite films. And I know before our episode we had a chat, and it's a hard choice, as it is for every guest, to just nail it down to one film. And I know you've got some honorable mentions, which we'll come to later on. But yeah, do tell us which film is one of your all-time favorites? What are we going to talk about?
All right. So I've chosen for this Alien, the original,
Fantastic.
the original Ridley Scott film. I actually rewatched it this morning, and it's just it never gets old. It's so brilliantly done.
Yeah.
So
Holds up so well, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does, and and I love about it how understated it is for a science fiction film. It was, I remember it was done. I think it was just after Star Wars had come out.
Yeah, 78, I think it was. 79?
79, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I think they wanted to go the opposite direction from Star Wars and not make everything too fantasy-ish. I think they wanted to make it very much grounded in reality, and essentially it's a movie about a bunch of space truckers. I heard it described once. So so basically where they come across this planet, they're all in like a hypersleep or whatever you want to call it. They're in stasis.
Yep.
And their ship, the Nostromo, which is basically a towing vessel towing a huge structure filled with some sort of mineral ore. They all get woken up and told they have to investigate this beacon on this planet called LV-426, and that's where they come across this alien for the first time.
Yeah, and the title of the film tells you everything you need to know. It's about an alien, right? And just to, I guess, give a little bit of background to some people who I think most moviegoers are familiar with the alien creature itself, and the films are still being made, and there's been the spin-offs and stuff, which we'll talk about. But it came out at an interesting time because, like you said, it's a year or two after Star Wars, so naturally it was going to draw some comparisons from that in terms of the special effects and the miniatures of the ships and all that stuff. Then you had a decade before that, you had 2001, A Space Odyssey. And we've covered both those films in recent episodes, 2001 and Star Wars. So definitely a good choice here to have another landmark science fiction film. And I don't think it was the debut film of Ridley Scott, but it was probably his first big film that really set his career and stuff. But I think it was one of the first films we saw with Sigourney Weaver in it as well.
Right.
So,
I think this film really made her career. I mean,
for sure, she's Ripley. She's Ripley.
She's just fantastic. To me, she's my all-time favorite movie heroine. You can relate to her because she's got fear. She's terrified throughout the whole movie. You can tell, but she keeps her head. She doesn't lose her mind. She keeps cool. She's an officer in the film, and all the way through, despite being terrified, she just keeps on going and keeps a level head. And it's just, just that mental fortitude that she's got. And then also in the sequel, you see her motherly instinct come out, and so all the best female qualities, being a mother, being a tough woman, being that cool, calm leader, despite being physically weaker than perhaps some of her male counterparts, or in fact the alien itself, which everybody is weaker than.
Of course.
But despite that, she just uses her head and is just absolute badass character.
For sure. One of the most well conceived female movie characters of all time, and she progressed through the sequels. Some were great, some were questionable, but in terms of a character, you think of Sigourney Weaver and you just think, she's Ripley from Aliens. Obviously she's got some other standout films like the Ghostbusters series and more recently Avatar, but Alien is where it started for her, and I think she's perfectly cast in that role, and a really good ensemble cast as well. And the dynamic they all had was really good. I noticed rewatching it the other day, the chemistry seemed real, and they all played their parts so convincingly. It felt like you were on the ship, and these were just people who worked on a ship, and it was just their job. It was like the daily grind of going from one place to another on a ship and sleeping for like a year of their life. Fascinating concept.
Exactly. And and as I said before, it's like a movie about these space truckers. You know, they're just there to drive this vessel. They're just carrying stuff, but they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you know, that again, we got go back to, you know, the big corporations in the background that you know, force them to stop and you know, basically put them in this situation. And how much exactly they knew in advance, they don't really let on.
Yeah. And obviously there's a character in the film who is not who he seems to be, without spoiling things too much, and that makes you think, what's the bigger implications of what's going on here? It's not completely random, and we kind of see a bit of that in the sequels as well. So now let's go back to the star of the film, which is obviously the alien, being called the alien. In your opinion, greatest movie monster ever conceived?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I'd say almost tied with Predator, which I know later on they sort of did crossover films, but
they did, yes.
keeping them separate. I think Predator was an excellent one. But no, the Alien is, it's just such an absolutely devastating creature. It's absolutely terrifying. The way it looks, that enormous elongated head, it has no eyes, but it can see, and the, you know, the menacing teeth, and then the other jaw that, you know, comes out and just, you know, stabs you in the head with that. It's
acid
it's
for
an
blood, for God's sake.
Acid for blood, exactly. Like
you're screwed.
there's that scene where the face hugger. So for those who haven't seen it, which I'd be surprised if anyone hasn't seen it at some point, but Kane, actually, the first person who comes in contact with him, who's actually played by John Hurt as well.
John Hurt again,
so he comes across this, you know, this huge derelict spacecraft, and they go inside and they find all these giant eggs everywhere. And he goes and sticks his face up to it. It opens up, and the face hugger comes out like this giant spider sort of creature. And what they don't realize at the time, it's laying an embryo inside him. And when he's back in the infirmary, they try to, you know, cut the leg to try and get it off his face, and the blood pours out, and basically this acid just burns through the floor and, you know, several levels. And it's just an absolutely terrifying creature. You don't dare kill this thing, because you know, you'll either put a hole in your spacecraft, or it'll get on you and you'll get burned as well. And it's just, it's almost like it's invincible, and it makes it incredibly terrifying. And the way that it's filmed in the movie as well, they really don't show much of it. And this is one thing I didn't like about the newer movies, like Alien Covenant and all of that, where you see it completely, you know, the whole creature. And it's just like, it's not as scary that way. It's sort of, there's you know, fear of the unknown when you don't fully see this whole thing. You just see enough just to scare you. Absolutely. And so I think it's an absolute masterclass in just, you know, just showing just what you need, you know, rather than just having big flashy visuals. It's
definitely, which was done in Jaws as well. Spielberg made that choice of only revealing the shark in phases. And at the time, people would say, well, special effects were not what they are today. Budgets were smaller, so you had to be creative in what you showed. But I think maybe that was what they were working with, but they used that to their advantage and revealed it in stages. And I think you're right. I think it builds it up slowly, and the incarnation of the alien going from this thing in an egg that jumps on a person's face, and then out comes the thing from the guy's chest that takes off. It grows to like 8 feet tall in like a couple of hours. And then they're just the soldiers. They're just like the, you know, the worker bees, because there's also a queen alien who we meet in the sequel, who's even more monstrosities. And we won't go too much into the sequel now, because we may have that coming up in a future episode. I'm not going to say when or who, but because it's a secret. But so it's such an ingenious creature design, and it's still being revisited and touched on today. So. But just quickly though, we'll go to, you know, if you'd like to mention any of the sequels or even the spin-offs quickly. Did you like them? Did you think they were worth watching? And, you know, what are your thoughts on the series?
The second one was excellent. That's undeniable. But at the same time, it's more of a straight up shoot 'em up action film, which, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love, and I love the second one. But I think for me, just the way the first one was, just, you know, only showed just what it needed to. Nothing was over the top, It was a humble film, I suppose you could call it.
Yeah, it's
But
small in a lot of ways, isn't it? But its legacy
yeah,
has been
but
amazing.
I like in these sort of grand stories, these big universes that built up through movies. Now, I like going back to the start, and I like seeing how things come to be the way they are.
Yep.
And so that's why, Alien has a special place in my heart. But
Sure. Yeah.
that being said, Alien 3, it was okay.
Yep.
I still watch it occasionally. I don't mind it.
Yeah, I don't mind Alien
it's
3. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was okay. It was done all right.
Mm.
It's sort of one of those things. How do you keep, reviving this story when each film supposedly seems to have closed it out, And so, so Alien 3 was okay. One thing I did like about Alien 3, right at the very end of the film, the transmission that Ripley sent out at the end of the first film gets played in the vehicle that crashed down on this planet or the escape pod that crashed down on the planet where Ripley ended up finding herself.
Yep.
And it plays that message from the original film, which you don't hear at any other point in between.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very cool little touch.
Definitely.
And then you had Alien Resurrection, which
Yeah.
silly film. Again, it's just like really forcing the premise now.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and then a couple of other versions since you've had Prometheus, which was a whole lot.
I didn't think much of any of them. I thought,
Yeah.
look, Prometheus was okay.
Yep.
Alien Covenant, I thought was garbage.
Right.
Great effects. I love the location because it was filmed in one of my favorite places at Milford Sound.
Oh, okay, right. Haven't seen it.
Yeah, so where the ship lands, it's actually right on the shore at Milford Sound.
Yeah, and can you remember how old you were, or the circumstances around how you first saw Alien, or who introduced it to you? Like, can you remember?
Yeah, actually, I don't know the exact year, but I know I actually saw Aliens first.
Oh, right. Yep.
And I forget what I had for breakfast the other day, but so thinking back is going to be difficult. But I think because my old man was big into action movies and all these sorts of things, and I think he had a copy of it on video, and so he was watching it. And I think that's when I first saw Aliens, and I sort of looked into it, and I'd seen, oh, Alien. Well, okay, this is just not plural. What's the go with this? And so I think I rented it from the video library, and I was in high school at some stage. I can't remember exactly which year, but I remember renting it and saw that, and like, I'm not a person who gets scared by movies, but I thought to myself, this is about as close as it'll ever get.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whereas I loved Aliens because it's a straight up action movie,
a
lot of guns, and I love that stuff. But this is just a very creepy, terrifying movie, and it's and I fell in love with it. It's absolutely brilliantly made.
That sense of dread and foreboding is there right from the start. It's like, these people are, they're on this ship in the middle of the far reaches of space. It's dark, it's dreary, it's depressing.
And the interior of the ship as well, the way it's designed, it's not flashy and bright and clean white surfaces, and it's not futuristic. All the consoles, all the screens you see, everything is just very basic numbers and text, and it's all very old technology, and it just looks like a gritty old truck.
Yeah, it does. It's which
it's
I guess back in the 70s when it was made, how they viewed the future. And I think you might know this. I think it's set in the year 2037. I think I see that pop up on the screen earlier on in the film, which is only like 14 years from now. So who knows? Maybe that'll be us in 14 years. You never know. But it's interesting to see how films of the past predicted the future as well.
Yeah.
I guess having seen the film and all the other sequels and knowing it so well, what would be like your rules for survival if you were on a ship with that alien? Like, what would you do? What would you do? How would you fight it? What would be your plan?
That's a hard one to answer. But and the other thing is too, it's we like to think that we'd have all the answers and we'd be so heroic, but for all we know, if you were actually put in that situation, you might be sitting in the corner shitting your pants. Just from sheer terror. We don't know how well we'd react unless we were actually in that situation. So I don't want to ascribe any magic abilities to myself, but look, You know what? I think everyone in that film did the best they could. I don't think I could have come up with a better plan. It's a matter of you have to try and track it down and isolate it. Obviously, you can't go toe to toe with it. That's not possible.
Yeah.
They have no real weapons in the movie. They've got a flamethrower. They've got cattle prods, which are useless.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be trying to outsmart it. And yeah, for one person to do that on their own, be very difficult. And even for Ripley, you know, she doesn't outsmart the thing. It's I won't give it away, but it's nobody outsmarts this thing. This thing is just so resilient and so fast. And just when you think you've got it cornered, it gets away. So so I don't think I'd have anything more to offer than what they already did.
Well, a good honest response. Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's what the video games exist for. It's like, oh, I know this alien, I know how to fight it, and then off you go, and you can do it that way. But I think Alien, I mean, it's a great choice of a film. It's definitely one of the landmark films of cinema. It gave us the alien monster, which has been revisited and redone. And there's another Alien film coming out, I think, next year, Alien Romulus or something like that. Don't know much about it.
Something about that,
yeah. So, but that's on the way, and obviously we've got the Alien Predator films, which we won't go into today. But it's a favorite scene or favorite moment?
I would have definitely the scene where they're sitting around the dinner table after the facehugger has detached itself from Kane, and he's starving, he's hungry, he's just absolutely shoveling down the food, and all of a sudden he starts choking, and it's a fantastic scene. It's quite horrific. But basically he starts convulsing, and everyone's trying to hold him down. They don't know what's going on. And then the blood starts spraying from his chest, like you get this small little burst of blood, and then eventually the alien bursts through, and that's just such an iconic scene. It's absolutely terrifying, and to think, the amount of pain and just what absolute horror it would be to be in that position. Sure. And one of the interesting things was I forget the lady's name, the one who played Lambert, the other female character. Her reaction when the blood spurts out and she gets a whole bunch of blood on her face, that was completely spontaneous. She did not know that was going to happen. And so you hear her basically just recoiling in horror, and she goes, "Oh God!" And that was a genuine reaction. She was not expecting it,
and it's so effective.
So that whole scene. I mean, once the alien comes out and slides across the table, it's not the most convincing, but just that sheer horror of that thing bursting through your chest while you're fully awake and conscious.
And the audience at the time would have had no idea that was about.
None whatsoever.
Because back then, like, films were just a mystery, and there was no internet buzz, there was no spoilers. It was like people would walk out of it and be like, "Oh my God, Alien!" Like, just go and see it. It'll scare the crap out of you, and it's still scary. It's still effective to this day. Just an ingenious concept of a monster. Whoever originally came up with that has created a unique legacy for cinema.
Absolutely. It was H.R. Geiger that designed it, I think it was.
H.R. Geiger. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, I'll look him up. All right.
He's got some very, very creepy drawings, that man.
Well,
very creative.
Come up with something like that, like, makes you wonder what's going on in that creative mind. But I mean, we're all the better for it anyway, because it's so iconic. But all right, fantastic. So let's keep rolling ahead now, and for your final film. And this is the film that you think everyone must see at least once in their life. And quite often people choose something that's a bit different from, say, the life-changing film or the film that they love the most. And this might not necessarily be your favorite film or the film you would watch over and over and over again, but it just touches on something that's like so unique or different. And you say to people like, "Hey, you've just got to see this film. Like, it's just something you need to experience." And I really like your choice. I think it's such a unique film. So do you want to tell us what the movie is and set it up?
Sure. It's quite a dumb film, I have to say. I'm not choosing it for its cinematic merits, let's say. It's a bit of an ironic choice, but so the film is called Idiocracy.
I'm the smartest guy in the world? Says who?
The IQ test you took in prison. You got the highest score in history.
Even smarter than President Camacho.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of America!
In the year
2505.
We got this guy. He's gonna fix everything. So you smart, huh?
The ordinary will be considered extraordinary.
I thought your head would be bigger.
Idiocracy.
For the smartest guy in the world, you're pretty dumb sometimes.
It's got what's his name? Luke Wilson, I think his name.
Yep.
And I forget the other girl. And anyway, there's a few well-known characters in it. Terry Crews is in it.
Yeah.
And basically, the premise is this very average army librarian played by Luke Wilson. He's just the most average man in every way, in intelligence, in ability, just perfectly average.
Yep.
Smack dead in the middle of every bell curve you can imagine. He's chosen to go into this army experiment into essentially hibernation, or suspended animation. And along with him is a prostitute named Rita, who's who's chosen to do it as well.
Yep.
And the whole scene with the army official, the scientist, explaining how he had to befriend her pimp and everything. It was just a fantastic scene.
Yeah.
So they're basically put in these two pods, and they're to be put to sleep for a year, where they'll wake up and everything will go back to normal.
Yeah.
But the guy who started this program, basically he's done for corruption and all this, and the funding gets cut off for this program, and the building that it all happens in gets demolished, and so the whole thing gets forgotten. And eventually these two wake up 500 years in the future. And rather than the world being this high-tech utopia, the world has just become completely retarded. It's just so dumbed down, stupid, where people can't even talk properly. It's like the language is like this mix of hillbilly and grunting, and it's the film is so absurd. I'm sort of almost regretting my decision to pick it, but
oh no, it's great. I think it's genius, actually, the idea that in the future we're not going to be smarter and more advanced, we're just going to be dumber, which is probably not that far off the truth.
And so it's a very satirical film, but it's quite funny. But one of the best parts of this film is at the start, the first 5 minutes, where they basically explain how the world got to be this way, and they compare this well-to-do young couple, both with good careers, typical suburban family, trying to have kids, but then they decide, oh, we're going to put it off because the economy is not great or whatever, and so they keep finding a way to hesitate and not have children.
Yep. And
eventually, when they decide, okay, yeah, we want to start trying, then they're both, because they're getting older, the husband, his sperm count is too low or whatever, and eventually he passes away because he masturbated too much, apparently. And so she ends up alone with no kids. Yep. Meanwhile, they're comparing that couple to this other guy, Clavon or whatever his name is, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Just this redneck, right, hillbilly. And he's sleeping with every woman he can find, having kids everywhere, out of wedlock. And you just see that this, they compare the family trees, where you've got, two on one side, and this one is like beep, 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 it just keeps popping up all these new kids.
Right. I remember that, yeah.
And then eventually the one on the left just becomes one person, and that's where it ends. And this one just keeps spreading like hundreds and hundreds of children,
So good.
And it's fantastic the way they describe it, because it's a very real scenario.
Oh, of course.
And everybody knows these sort of people who've got, a dozen kids out of wedlock, single
absolutely.
mothers everywhere, single fathers everywhere. And it's just, the nuclear family is essentially disintegrating.
Pretty much. And that's kind of where the film predicts that we're going to be, that the world's just fallen into this heap, and they're just making do. Somehow they're still alive, but they're just scraping by.
That's right. And also the technology thing does come into it, where you think that technology basically helps to advance civilization and help us with our health, and all these sort of things help us to live longer and prosper and do better, and that element is there. But what they show is that the advancements in medical science essentially end up being like, for example, this redneck, he jumps his motorcycle or something and does some stupid stunt and impales his crutch on something, right? And thanks to medical science and surgery, they managed to give him back his full reproductive ability. And so he just carries on doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
And so there's essentially no consequence for those for these stupid people, because there's always either technology or welfare or something will bail them out.
Yeah.
And so the people with the right qualities to reproduce, well, they're not really being favored. You know, they hesitate too much.
Yeah.
And so the careless people basically end up ruling the world. And
in
this dystopian future, it's like they don't use water for anything anymore. They just use this stuff called Brawndo, which is essentially a Gatorade.
Yeah.
And
To water the
they've
crops
got no
and
food.
everything,
There's no crops because they're using it to water the plants, because it's what plants crave, just like that's what humans crave. And everybody's just dumb and can't think for themselves. And you've got a couple of big corporations running everything, and like they go to a Costco, and it's just like this thing is like miles long, this huge warehouse, but they go into it like the roof's caved in, and it's just like nothing's kept up. It's hilarious.
It is hilarious. I think it's a genius idea, and the brainchild of a guy called Mike Judge, who, if anyone might not know the name, you'll know his stuff. He started off with Beavis and Butthead, then it was King of the Hill, another great satirical comedy called Office Space, and it's all about satire, his stuff, and about stupid people being in charge and the smart people trying to rise up. So he does that really well, I think. And now let's talk about the president in this film, played by the great Terry Crews.
Terry Crews, legend,
absolute star of the show here, and just tell us, like, how is this guy president, and like what actual contribution does he make in, if any?
It's hilarious. He's not shown to be completely stupid. He's a very bombastic character, and one thing that annoyed me a little bit, because I am a right winger, he was, and Terry Crews himself, they compare this character to Donald Trump, which because Donald Trump he's a very bombastic character as well. He's not what you would call presidential in the traditional sense. He's not polished. He's an outsider, and he was a reality TV star, and he's got some ridiculous character traits. Everyone can admit, and so they sort of compare this, Terry Crews's President Camacho to Donald Trump, which I personally disagree with. I don't think there's any comparison there. But anyway, so you've got this guy. What's his full name? Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho or something. It's a ridiculous name. And he comes into the Congress or whatever, and everybody's getting rowdy, so he just pulls out a machine gun and starts firing to settle them down, and it's just so absurd. But he plays the character so well. And eventually shows himself to be a pretty decent man, because he sees this guy who's he's now the smartest man alive, despite being completely average in our time. And they get him to try and solve some of their problems, and he doesn't solve every problem, but the big one being that he goes, well, maybe we should water the crops with just water. And they're like, what? Like, what's in a toilet? And they just think it's a ridiculous idea. And because it doesn't happen instantly, they try to punish him, and but they get someone out there in the fields with the cameras, and they see, okay, yep, the plants are growing, so he gets pardoned. But it's a ridiculous character, but Terry Crews is he's so animated. He's such a larger than life guy, big muscular guy, like a wrestler, and he just plays it to perfection. Absolutely. Perfection.
And just to show how not far this civilization has gone, because I haven't seen the film in a while, but what was like the #1 movie in the world in that future?
It was just called Ass.
Ass, right? It was like a guy's ass on the screen.
Yeah,
and everyone's
just
sitting
literally
there, like,
just an ass for like hours. Then everyone just staring at this ass. Literally nothing happens.
That's it.
And everybody's just so dumbed down. It's just like they can't deal with garbage anymore. There's just like mountains of garbage everywhere. It's hilarious.
It is. It's really funny. Yeah. Now, obviously, in reality, I don't think we'd let the world get to that stage. But I think some of the things it touches on, where it's like, if like you said, he's telling them, use water to water the crops, not this Gatorade stuff. But because they don't have any context of that, it's like we don't understand that, so that can't be true, right? It's kind of like what those characters represent. And it's like they put their faith in this president because he appears to be the smartest guy in the world. And then when Luke Wilson's character comes along and says, well, actually, no, I'm smarter, even though I'm not that smart. And it just like upsets the apple cart a bit. But I think I guess in its own way, it sort of touches on some things about society, I guess. What did you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely right. So the corporations are a big part of this film. The main one being Bronto. And there's a scene where they explain how this company, because the government went bankrupt, they basically bought out the FDA, a couple of other, government bureaucracies. I can't remember exactly which ones. But yeah, so basically as a result, they now own the regulatory system. So they just say, oh, we'll use our product in everything. And so there's that corporatism aspect to things. Yeah. And, the consumerism, it's just everybody's just consuming mindlessly. Yeah. And so I suppose, we can ask, are there any parallels to today's society? Yes and no. It's probably a bit of a stretch. But I suppose the theme being that, this is what happens when you let corporations get too much power. And also the other theme that a lot of people, I think, don't detect in this film is that too much technology and too much removal of risk and consequence, what it does to people. It makes people sloth-like. There's like I said with this guy who has 100 kids and without any consequence. That's it. Ultimately medical science keeps fixing him so he can keep doing his stupidity. Obviously, how does a man pay for all these kids? Well, you can imagine. I mean, it's not touched on in the film, but obviously is some form of welfare. Something's picking up the tab.
It's the band-aid effect. It's like we'll just keep patching things up. We won't address the actual problem.
Exactly. And then so in the end, you've got this society where there's no consequences. And so it doesn't matter how much you screw up. It's like survival of the fittest normally, because there's if you make good decisions and you procreate, and you do the right things, you succeed. But in this world, all the traits that you would think would favor the failing of a species, all these things get amplified because the consequences are removed. So
it's interesting. And look, I guess there is some appeal in that about life with no consequences. Like, oh, okay, maybe that would be okay. Like I could just sort of do what I want and nothing bad's going to happen to me, right? So, and I guess that's why the society kind of all falls into this slump, and they're all like, there's no one that's like appears to try to be above anyone else. They're all just like, they're kind of like a hive now, aren't they? Of people. They're just like this one consciousness that's not very bright. And
well, there's not even much of a consciousness in this film. It's just these people just walk around like zombies. I mean,
pretty much. Yeah.
But I think that if you go back to the original couple that they compare, want to procreate. I mean, they are intelligent. They have a good career, so they can obviously support the child. They can educate the child, and you think this would be a good productive family with productive offspring, right? But those people, they now are so focused on other things like careers, they don't procreate. So the people with the good qualities are not procreating, and they're just the dumb ones just breed like there's no tomorrow.
It's interesting.
So it's essentially a world where natural selection is taken out of the picture. So
definitely.
About and it's like, well, I know we like to make our lives easier and take away risks, and it's like, okay, well, if you get injured, we can fix that. But sometimes it's like, well, I think humans need some danger in their life to keep them on the straight and narrow. So
that wake up call, for sure.
That's right.
Definitely. And look, we can't go too deep with this film because it's a goofy.
It's a very shallow film. Be warned, it is a ridiculous film. It is not intellectual in any way.
No, for sure.
It is a very silly film, but despite its silliness, it has some interesting themes to think about, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's a bit of social commentary and a kind of a warped version of where humanity might be headed if we don't start thinking for ourselves. And which was all right. So we've had three really different films there, Alex. Thanks for picking those and three really different conversations about the state of the world and you know, an alien from space and idiots, basically. So we've covered everything, I think. At this
bit of
point.
variety, some a little bit left field.
Absolutely, I think we've gone down a few rabbit holes and had a really good chat. So yeah, so I like to sort of wrap up every episode and just ask, you know, I guess the future of movies. You know, what would you like to see get made? What do they need to stop making? Because there's obviously a lot of changes happening in the film industry at the moment. Personally, I think the Marvel bubble has well and truly popped. There's also the perspective on, you know, how woke culture is infiltrating films and you know, streaming and how that's changing things. So yeah, like what future movies for you? Like what needs to happen, or what would you like to see happen?
Well, for one, I'd like to see a hell of a lot less of these ridiculous superhero movies. I think I mean, I think everybody's got the whole superhero fatigue now. I think they well and truly peaked with Avengers Endgame. After that, it's all downhill.
Yeah. Couldn't be topped.
Those were all great characters, you know, but this is a problem when you have almost a monopolizing of the industry with someone like Disney buying up every studio, and everything that comes out from them is just cookie cutter crap. I'd love to see an end to the sequels, the prequels, the remakes, the live action remakes, like absolutely bastardizing the beloved original Disney cartoon films like Snow White coming up. I mean, that is just a joke and a half. You know, basically destroying, you know, parts of the culture that people love and admire. But yeah, there's no original ideas anymore. You know, even like with myself, I love old action movies. I love, you know, the male archetype, you know, these hero types. Occasionally you get one gem come out like John Wick. That is just fantastic series of movies, and Keanu Reeves is just eternally brilliant. So you get some odd gems like that. But you know, or you get a movie like Ford versus Ferrari, which I quite like, or Top Gun Maverick. You know, that's very much a pro-military, very patriotic sort of film, unashamedly so. That's very rare. So it's nice to see those sort of things come out. But yeah, it would be nice to see studios go back to trying some new things.
Yeah.
Like The Matrix, for example, was very radical, very different from it for its time.
Yeah.
But the problem is a lot of these studios just aren't willing to risk putting in the money because it costs a lot of money to make a film these days.
Oh, 100%.
So
yeah. And they've got to compete with television and streaming, and it's not the industry it used to be. Yeah.
So look, there are still good shows, good movies coming out. It's just few and far between. And if we didn't have to see another prequel, sequel, or remake, it's not a day too soon. So
100%.
So that's probably the main one for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. This has come up in a few chats I've had with people on this show and outside of it, where like originality seems to have disappeared, and I think it's not gone altogether. Just these film studios have to be willing to risk the loss of millions or billions of dollars and go back to just creating content that's original, that's fresh, but that portrays people that are human and human being flawed and having real genuine fears, who find themselves in these fantastical situations and figure it out, you know, and not these like people who progressively become like these superhumans as time goes on. That's not really realistic. And we're seeing this with like the Fast and the Furious franchise, where like, you know, Dom Toretto is essentially the superhero now, who can use a car like it's an extension of his body and do things that are completely impossible and defy the laws of physics. And you look back to that started, it was a street racing film.
10 films, it's still going, and it's just like
2 more to go apparently. Two more to go, and then there'll be spin-offs and all of this stuff. But I think we need to go back to the well and invite some new ideas. And I think we're starting to see a few of those pop up. you know, and some people start to ruffle some feathers, and hopefully they get their moment. So I'm with you, mate. 100%. I agree with you. No, some really good points. Some really good points. I think that the significance of movies, you know, is still important. And the current golden age of television is sort of stealing a bit of its thunder. But you know, I guess with TV shows, they can just keep going and going and going and have no real end. You know, you can't beat a movie for just this one-off self-contained story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it can still have an impact on you. And I think, you know, at least two of the films you chose do that. Idiocracy, well, it's another conversation, but I think you know, the power of film is it's still there. So we just have to go back and give it that chance to, you know, to shine again like it did for us growing up in the 80s and 90s. That was really the last golden age of cinema and the movies. And then DVDs came along, and really this internet and streaming just kind of changed everything, for better or worse. Who knows? Like, only time will tell. But all right, well, yeah, well, it's been a really great chat, Alex. Thank you for sharing your take on these films, and
No, I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
give us a different kind of perspective on some topics. And you know, for people who haven't seen any of these films, or you saw it in a different way, you know, that's what my movie story is all about. It's this person's take on these movies, and to get you to maybe think of them differently, or think about, you know, what's your story that goes with this movie. So thanks very much, Alex, and yeah, it's been great chatting to you, mate. Thanks for being on My Movie Story.
Always a pleasure.
All right, mate. Catch ya. Bye.
Catch you later.